Sure. Yes. So welcome to Faith and Calm. This is class number 202. This is our first post pace clock class, and by special request from my wife, I'm going to continue. I'm going to do some leftover stuff from Passover. We have leftovers from Passover, but it's not leftovers.
It's the most magnificent, one of the most magnificent repertoire I've ever heard in my life.
And also, it's very relevant for all time. So therefore, it is not really a leftover, and it actually is one of the unanswered questions from Pesach that we have to get around to answering. Because as you know, there are 4 questions, Manashtana, Manatahalayla, and you ask the 4 questions. And the first of the 4 questions is, why do we dip twice on Pesach? And you know, it's very interesting. If you're patient, the other questions are eventually answered. Like, why do we eat matzah? Well, yeah, finally, when we get around to eating, you know, we say matzah that we eat tonight. Why do we do it? Because what happened in Egypt? And the same thing with the more, that question is answered. And the question about leaning, well, it's not explicitly said, but eventually they get around to saying, you know, tonight is a day of freedom, and, you know, free people, we lean, we don't, you know, slaves have to sit at attention. So those questions are clearly answered. But whatever happened to this question about dipping twice, dipping karpas in Salzwasser and salt water, and then more in Hiroshis? Why doesn't the Father ever answer these questions? And you might think that it's, you know, it's like, you know, he doesn't have, you know, doesn't have an answer. But I mean, why even ask the question in the Haggadah if you're never going to answer the question? So this answer is going to come from the Chazon Ish by way of Rabbi Y.Y. Jacobson. And as my wife said, we think it's really is a fundamental, important lesson in life. So therefore, it fits into Faith and Calm. It fits in. It fits in. Yes, yes. Okay, so to explore this, we should look at the beginning of the Haggadah. And at the beginning of the Haggadah, right after the 4 questions, so the Father begins to tell the story. He says, you know, at the beginning we were Vadim, your fathers were Vadim Leparol Mitzrayim. And then God took you out of there with a strong hand, and I took your fathers from there, and I took them around the land of Canaan. And I gave to Abraham Yitzhak, and I took Yitzhak, and I gave him Yaakov, and to Yaakov, and to Esav, and then to Yaakov I gave Zahir, and then Yaakov went down into Egypt. So everything is about what God did. God took us out. God took us from Egypt, from Mesopotamia. He took us from Ur. He took us into there. He gave us our fathers. And then it says, and then Yaakov is the one who went and took us down to Egypt. Whoa, wait a second. I thought God took us and put us in Egypt. What do you mean that Yaakov put us, you know, Yaakov and his family went down to Egypt? I mean, it's like they chose to go there. They didn't choose to go there. It was part of God's plot. So now we're getting deeper into the story. What is it? Why is it that it sounds like the Haggadah tries to make it sound like if it's our fault that we got into Egypt and our fault that we got into Galus? That's going to help us understand this idea of why we did twice. What's the connection? So to understand this, we have to understand where else.
Sorry, I didn't mean to do that. Go ahead.
Where you can answer the question. Where else in the Chumash do we talk about dipping? We talked about dipping, you know, you're dipping.
Let them answer.
Anybody want to answer the question? You can unmute yourself. You see this? It's the Haggadah, the Passover is interactive. Okay, Shayna's here, Zuri's here, but I guess
the Kohanim, you know, dipping the what is it called, the Nida or something, into the hyssop into the Nida, but it might not be actually dipping, but that's just what came to mind.
Good guess.
It's close. You got part of it. I think you're getting there.
Good guess.
So let's go. So
anybody else have another guess? Sorry, have another guess? Anybody else have another guess?
She's busy working. So don't.
Okay.
She's busy working.
Think about dipping something.
Okay. Oh, somebody else came here. Olda.
Who dipped something in blood?
So we're talking about dipping here. So dipping. Now, the Jews, when they left Egypt, remember what they had to do. They were commanded the night before they left that they were supposed to take a lamb and they were supposed to slaughter it. And then they were supposed to dip something called hyssop, azov, into the blood, and then they were supposed to put it on the doorpost. And then because they put it on the doorpost and on the lintel above it, the God would see that, and they were not allowed to go out because it'd be bad news bears if they went outside. And then God would see this, and he would hop over the houses, and that's where we get the name Passover, because if the Jews didn't do that, then it would have been very bad for the Jews. So the whole holiday of Passover comes from this whole idea that and that's what we call it, Passover. And you would think that's not really the main part of the story, that God hopped over the houses, Why is this the exciting part of Passover? The exciting part is they got out of Egypt. But the exciting part is about God hopping over. Now, there actually happens to be one Hasidic master who says it very nicely. He says, God was dancing, actually. He said, Dove went to Jid, Dove went to Jid. Every time he saw a house with blood on it, he said, where's a Jewish house? Wow, it's a place where mitzvahs are done. That's amazing. And God was just leaping and jumping and so forth of that sort. That's a very sweet statement, but what was so special about it? So that's one thing that's special about it. So that's one dipping. And by the way, we never did this again. Everything else from Passover, the matzah, the moror, everything else is continues every single year. Even the carbon Pesach used to be brought, and they used to bring the lamb. They did it every year when there was a temple. But this dipping was only once in history, and it was only on the doors. And did God really need it? So there's something about dipping there that needs to be explained. The other place in the Chumash that we see dipping is much earlier story, with Yosef. When the brothers put Yosef in the pit, they decided that wasn't going to be good enough. So they sold him. But then they said, our father's going to probably, he's going to send out search parties. He has a lot of money. So we better make sure that he's not looking for Yosef for the rest of the time. So what we'll do is we'll take a lamb, we'll slaughter it, and we'll dip Yosef's ketunas, his garment, into the blood of a lamb. Catch it? Blood of a lamb, leaving Egypt, blood of a lamb, dipping the blood in. There's a connection there. And then they showed it to Yaakov. And Yaakov said, my son is torn to shreds. There's no hope for him. And that's an important point. We don't really pay attention to that. But think of it, if they just told that Yosef's missing, we don't know where he is, then when they saw that Yaakov was crying and weeping for 20 years, they would have said, what, we sold him down to Egypt and that's where he is now. But this way, they couldn't really do anything because, he was dead. So that really is a key point. And that's really a key reason what happened in order for the Jews at the beginning before the Jews went down to Egypt. Now, here's where the Ben Ish Chai connects the two together. He says it's interesting. In order to fix the initial problem and why the Jews ended up in Egypt is partially, of course, God wanted them there, but it's also because of this division in the family. When Jews are not united together, when Jews are fighting with each other, then our enemies become very strong. When we got one's here and one's there, and they see that we're not united together, they figure that they got some leverage and some way to get an in. Make a split between the Americans and the Israelis. That's the way to win the battle and so forth. You try and divide your enemies and so your enemies and make it. So when they see Jews are fighting with each other, when Jews don't care about each other and so forth, that really opens up it for all the anti-Semites and everybody else to get in the door. So what was happening was that this Jewish family was not going to survive in this world if they were fighting among each other. That's basically the story. That if you don't have them all together and united together, then you know what? We really don't have a chance against the rest of the world. And God said, in order for this family to heal, you have to do something to heal the situation that happened with Yosef. And that is what the blood of the goat is all about. You see, they had to do something, they had to atone for it, and therefore they had to take a hyssop. What is hyssop in Hebrew? Azov. What does Azov mean in Hebrew? It was a cleansing agent, actually. Hyssop was the old world, the old time historical laundry detergent. They even, I think they have one in Israel. They call it Azov, So it's a cleansing agent. That's why you had to take specifically hyssop, and you had to dip the blood in it, meaning the blood, just like the blood that you did for the lamb before at the time of Yosef, you had to use that. And then the very interesting point, and this is the key point, you're not allowed to leave the house. You're not allowed to leave while the blood is in there. What does that remind you of? The same thing with the Pesach offering every year. You had to form a group of people. You couldn't break out. You had to be part of it. You had to eat it with your family. You had to sit around the table. You couldn't tell, one kid to get out, because he's disturbing it. Everybody had to sit there. The kids, the mothers, the fathers, the whole family, the whole mishpacha had to sit there and had to learn how to get along together. And they weren't allowed out until 2 a.m. in the morning when the Seder is over. That's basically what it is, which basically means as follows. Jews can disagree with each other, and we can disagree a lot about each other, but it's how you disagree. They did a study about married couples, and they found out that, that it's not necessarily the best married couples are the ones that never argue. The best married couples are, because they found out that usually that after 50 years, they're still arguing about pretty much the same stuff, 70% at least, and the same things that they were when they first got married, but it's how they disagree, how much respect they have for each other. So when you have that connection, when everybody's at the table and everybody realizes we're all together, we may not agree, but you know what, your blood, your family, you're part of my family, and so forth like that. That was the healing that had to happen for the Jews to be able to leave Egypt. That was the connectivity that had to happen. So there we have all the different things. The two dippings, the dipping for Yosef, the dipping when the Jews left Egypt. Those are the two dippings. We don't do it with blood, but we do it symbolically anyway. We do it with something called karpas, which interestingly enough, Rashi tells us that karpas and tachelis was the colors of Yosef's tunic. So there we go. There we have the karpas. And therefore, what do you do with the karpas? You don't dip it in blood, but you dip it in salt water, which is symbolic of Yaakov's years. Okay, so there we have it. We do dip, and we do remember the situation that, when Jews are not united, it's a sad situation, but also the dipping is also a healing process, because when we go back and we heal, we have to go back to the same situation that we had before and to heal it. And the healing is realizing that, division is not what Jews are about. Jews are really all one family. Families disagree, spouses disagree, and that's okay. It's all right. We're all different. We all have different ways of looking at things. But in the end, we're family, and we're all in this together, and the rest of the world is not together with us, and they could care less what happens to the Jews. And they could say just as well, just as well the Gaza can win as well as this Hezbollah can win, and the Jews, they really don't care, just as long as they get what they want. So we have to realize that, it's up to us. It's up to us Jews to stick together with each other and to care about our brothers in Israel, and they're all part of our family. And I'll finish with a little story here then that sort of illustrates this. And that is that there was a Hasidic master. His name was the Zvila Rebbe. I don't know which Zvila Rebbe it was, because there's one in Boston, but maybe it was a father or a grandfather of the one in Boston. Anyway, this Zvila Rebbe was in Russia, and he was thrown into one of these gulag camps. And he was in that camp for a number of years. And then one day they called him into the commandant's office, and the commandant said, I want you to sign this paper, and that we'll be able to go free. The Zvila Rebbe thought to himself, and he says, it's Shabbos. I can't sign on Shabbos. But maybe this is the case of Mesiras Nefesh. Not a Mesiras Nefesh, a case of Pekuach Nefesh, of saving my life, because it's dangerous. But then he also thought, for me, probably not, because I'm still a young man, and I can survive. If I have to go out later, I'll go out later. So he told the commandant, I can't sign it, my Shabbos. Commandant got all furious at him, said, what do you mean? You're going to die here. You may never get out of this place, and so forth. Just for not signing, you may have another 10 years here being insubordinate. And then he turned to another Jew who happened to be standing there in the office at the same time. And he said, and by the way, I want you to sign, this is your decree to leave the camp. And the other Jew was not a religious Jew at all, far from it. And he looks at the piece of paper, he looks at the rabbi, and he tells the commandant, I can't sign. It's Shabbos. And the commandant says, what? What do you mean you can't sign? Yeah, he's a rabbi. What do you? You don't. Anyway, the Zvila Rebbe was listening, and he was thinking, hey, this guy's an old man. He may not survive if he doesn't sign. So he tells the commandant, you know what? I'm going to sign for him because I can't sign for myself. But for him, it's saving a Jewish life. I can sign from him, and that's considered Pekuach Nefesh, saving a life. So therefore, I can sign on Shabbos for him. The commandant hears this and goes, forget it. I'm signing for both of you guys. Get out of here. And that, because he was just so impressed with, this, what a Jew is, and the connectivity of each Jew to each other Jew, and how much we care about each other deep down, and how much we would do something for other. And there are certainly Jews now who are risking their lives and their blood, and in ways that don't even make sense, to stand guard when they should be overrun, should have overrun them long ago. And but you know what? They still go in, they still volunteer, they still do that. And even though the government does not act the way it's supposed to, nevertheless, they say, you know what? It doesn't matter what the government is or who is the head of the government. I really don't care. We're all one family, and we all have to help each other. And I think that's an important lesson for this time. And if there's any questions, I'll open it up to questions. And if not, I will hand the microphone over to my wife.
Yeah, I would ask a short question, but would you stop recording for questions?
Let me pause the recording. I think that's what I'm supposed to do, and then we'll restart it. Okay, so take the stage.
Okay. Hello. So please stay tuned for as long as possible because I'm gonna make it short. But why is it blurry all of a sudden? Maybe I'll move this away. That's better. Yeah, that's better. So I have a story that I absolutely loved that I'd like to tell tonight. The camera's having difficulty focusing. I don't know why. So does anybody have any questions before I begin? You asked a couple questions before.
No.
Okay, good. So let me pin myself. Yeah. Okay, good. So so today is first of all, today is a very special day. Today is Koach Nisan, the 28th of Nisan. Tonight will be the 29th of Nisan. And today, in 1991, the Rebbe told the Jewish people that he had that he had done everything he could to bring Mashiach, and he's turning over the job to us. And the Rebbe wasn't joking. He said, it's your job now. People burst into tears. People said, what? You've got to do this. This is too hard for us. And the Rebbe said, listen, if you believe that I'm the Rebbe, then you have to listen to what I said. And I'm telling you the truth. The job is yours. So anyway, one explanation behind that is that there's one thing Mashiach can't do. The Rebbe told us Mashiach is ready in the world. The Rebbe told us that Mashiach has already been appointed. The Rebbe hinted broadly many, many, many times that he is Mashiach. But there's one thing that Mashiach can't do. There's one thing Mashiach is a Jewish king. There's one thing a Jewish king can't do. He can't make himself king. Only the people can make him king. And only the people can make him king. And so that's what's left to us to do. It's left to us to tell the world about Mashiach and to tell the world about the things that the Rebbe said about Mashiach. And that's and it's apparently every single Jew's job. So okay. So I want to start with the four things that I always start with, which is that number one, we're in an extraordinary time. The Rebbe told us that the Geula is unfolding. Number two, that we were handpicked to be in this time. Our neshamas were handpicked to be in this time. Number three, that we have all the tools we need to navigate this time. The Torah is our guidebook, and the mitzvahs are our power tools. And number four, what we're doing tonight, actively by learning about the redemption, we actively advance it. So we just passed a gorgeous holiday of Pesach. It was really gorgeous. Even the weather was gorgeous. It was unbelievable. All aspects were very, very beautiful. But at the same time, if the world had been rumbling before Pesach, the world started rumbling even more on Pesach. And with all the anti-Semitism, all the campus, not riots, but close to riots. And and uh, and it shouldn't come as a surprise to us because since we were in Pesach, we just learned in the Haggadah. The Haggadah says it every year. Behold over door, Omdim Aleinu L'Chalosenu. In every we and the sages were absolutely brilliant. This truism of being a Jew, that in every generation the enemies rise up to get us. That truth they made into a song, like a friendly song in the Haggadah. So we know, Omdim Aleinu L'Chalosenu, and it's just, it's something we grow up with, this reality. I was still surprised. Well, I was surprised to see such anti-Semitism in America. My parents lived through the Holocaust. They were survivors. Most of their families were most of their immediate family were my mother and my mother's family, both her parents and two of her siblings were murdered by the Nazis, and she was left with only one sibling. In my father's family, his father and his sister were murdered by the Nazis, and only one sister remained with him. And me, I'm named after my two grandfathers, both of whom were murdered in the Holocaust. So Shalamis Yehudis is after Shlomo and Yosef, two people who were murdered. I'm named after two murdered people. But even for me, I somehow never expected to see this in America, So what do we do about all this? Why is Hashem doing this to us?
I'm sorry to interrupt. I remember video with Rebbe when Rebbe was asked, can Holocaust be repeated? And he said, any day, something like that. Yes, it was long ago. I saw this video. He said, any day, something like that was the answer.
Because the general said it's not. I heard the Rebbe say it's not going to happen again.
I know people know other answers, but this answer also exists.
Yeah, interesting. I would love to see that. So anyway, the Rebbe did tell us that we are in the redemption. We're stepping into the redemption now. So, and we know that back in Egypt, it was back in Egypt, when Moshe came and told the Jewish people we're getting out of Egypt, it wasn't a piece of cake after that. It got much worse for the Jews, to the point that the Jews stopped listening to Moshe. It said, Mikotza Ruach, from shortness of breath, they stopped listening to him. They said, you told us you came to save us, and look what happened. And they stopped believing. So anyway, and we know that our redemption is an exact parallel of the redemption from Egypt. So why do such things happen? I really don't know. We have to ask God. I'm not God's secretary, as one of my mentors, Mrs. Goldworm, would say. I'm not God's secretary. What do you want from me? But one thing that such a thing does, that such a world situation does, is that a Jew we have faith in Hashem. But much of that faith that we have is potential faith. I believe in Hashem. I believe that Hashem is good, and I believe all these different things. But when we're in a situation like we are now, it demands a much more active faith. And that is something that Hashem loves. Hashem loves it when the Jews put their faith in him, and him, her, whatever you want to call Hashem. He loves it when it's an active kind of faith. So Baruch Hashem, thank God, we're now after Pesach. And Pesach, as we know, is it's a gas station refill for faith in Hashem. We know that the matzah is called the food of faith, and the more matzah we eat, the more faith we get in Hashem. And we're also past the seventh day of Pesach. And the whole thing about the seventh day of Pesach, which was the splitting of the sea and the crossing of the Red Sea, the whole thing about that was not only did the Jews come out on the other side with much more faith in Hashem than they had even when they left Egypt, they had yet more after the crossing of the sea. but it says we say it every day. If you daven the song of the sea, it says, V'ya'aminu b'Moshe, v'ya'aminu b'Hashem u'b'Moshe avdo. And the Jewish people believed in Hashem and in right before they burst into song because they were so happy and they trusted Hashem and they trusted Mashiach, they trusted Mashiach of their generation, Moshe, so much. It says, V'ya'aminu b'Hashem u'b'Moshe avdo, and they believed in Hashem and in Moses, his servant. And so anyway, we too have a Moses of our generation, the Rebbe, and the Rebbe and our Moshe said that we're entering the Geula, and can we trust him? How much can we trust him? So I'm going to tell you a remarkable story. A very, very, very sweet story, and I hope you like it as much as I did. So the story is about a man named Moshe Mendel Feiner. Moshe Mendel Feiner. You can look him up on the internet. They have they had a write-up of him after he passed away at the age of 95 in 2012. So Moshe Mendel Feiner was born in Europe before the war. I figured he's born around 1917, and he had a very interesting life, a long, interesting life, but it was not easy. When he was only 2 years old, he lost his mother. After his mother passed away, then his father remarried, and something very bad went on. The stepmother did not get along with little Moshe Mendel Feiner, and from a very early age, he had to leave the house. It was so bad, and I don't know if they threw him out or he left, but he was on his own from an extremely young age. And he made his way to Belz, the city of Belz. And thank God, the Belzer Rebbe, Rabbi Aaron of Belz, saw him, and he gave him a job. He gave him a paying job, a job that paid nicely so that he could support himself. And more important than that, Belzer Rebbe became a surrogate father. He became like a second father for Moshe Mendel Feiner. And Moshe Mendel Feiner went through the Holocaust. He went through this, Second World War. He actually fought on the side of the Russian army against the Germans. He saved many Jews, including Jewish children. He was really an extraordinary person. And after the war, he went to a DP camp in Germany, and then he ended up in America. And he married, and he had, and in 1957, he was married with at least one child at that point. And a big tragedy struck him. In 1957, the Belzer Rebbe passed away. And for him, this was an enormous tragedy because the Belzer Rebbe is the only one who pulled him through from an early childhood, through the Holocaust, through everything. And it was very, very, very hard for him. Then 4 days after the Belzer Rebbe passed away, his little girl starts going blind. And he can't believe it. And he takes her to doctor after doctor after doctor, and they confirm the diagnosis. Yes, your little girl is going blind, but we don't know what's causing it, and we don't know how to stop it. So after he went to a big doctor who gave him a particularly gruesome forecast of what would happen to his little girl, he came home with his little girl. He put the little girl to bed, and he couldn't sleep that night. And at 2 a.m, he couldn't take it anymore. And he opened his mouth and he started speaking to Hashem. And he said, Ribono Shalom, God in heaven, how could this happen? What kind of a life did you give me? When I was 2 years old, my mother passed away already. And then my stepmother didn't like me and I had to leave the house. I was a kid on his own. And then I went through the Holocaust. And in the Holocaust, you killed every single one of my relatives, my father, all my brothers, all my sisters. And now you took the Belzer Rebbe away from me. And 4 days later, my little girl is going blind. Tata. He said, Tati, his father, Ratavet mir, save me. I can't do this. I can't manage my life anymore. This is beyond my abilities. I can't do this anymore. and he said, I need somebody. I need a mentor. I need a rabbi. I need somebody to guide me, somebody to help me because I can't get out of this mess myself. At that moment, the phone rings at 2 a.m. in his apartment, and he picks it up, and there's a strange voice on the phone he never heard it before. And the voice says, hello, this is Rabbi Hodakov. I'm one of the secretaries of the Lubavitcher Rebbe. Tell me, are you Rabbi Rabbi Feiner or are you Rabbi Feiner? And Moshe Mendel Feiner said, no, I'm Mr. Feiner. I'm not a rabbi. And Rabbi Hodakov said, well, if you're Mr. Feiner and not Rabbi Feiner, why does it say Rabbi Feiner in the New York City phone book? And Mr. Feiner said, excuse me, this is what you call me about at 2 a.m. to find out why the phone book says Mr. Feiner and not Rabbi Feiner? It was a legal thing that I did I needed to do a couple of years ago. But I'm Mr. Feiner. And so Rabbi Hodakov said, okay, listen, let me tell you why I'm calling. That's not why I'm calling. No, that's not why I'm calling. He said, an hour ago at 1 a.m, Lubavitcher Rebbe called me into his office, and he said, call Mr. Feiner in New York, and ask him what is going on in your home right now. And Rabbi Hodakov said, from 1 o'clock till 2 o'clock, I called every Feiner in the New York City phone book, and none of them had an answer. Not everybody said, nothing's going on in my home. I don't know what you're talking about. You're the only one I didn't call because it said Rabbi Feiner, and the Rebbe is very specific. If you were a rabbi, the Rebbe would have said Rabbi. So after calling everybody, I went back to the Rebbe and I said, I called everybody in the phone book. The only one I didn't call, it says Rabbi Feiner. And he read the whole name to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe said, yeah, call that guy. So he called, so that's why I called you. So now that I know you really are Mr. Feiner, just like the Rebbe said, tell me, what is going on in your house? What is going on in your home? Moshe Mendel Feiner couldn't believe it. And he couldn't believe it. And he told him the whole thing. He said, my daughter is going blind, and the doctors don't know what's causing it. And they don't know what to do about it. And Rabbi Hodakov said, oh, got it. That's what I expected to hear, something like that. Don't worry about it. I'm going to call you back in 5 minutes. And he hung up. 5 minutes later, he called him back. And he said, listen, I talked to the Rebbe. I went into the Rebbe's office, and the Rebbe said, you are not to worry. Tomorrow morning, go to Kings County Hospital and go to such and such a doctor in Kings County Hospital, and your little girl is going to be fine. The Rebbe told me to repeat to you, do not worry. Everything is going to be fine. And so Moshe Mendel Feiner couldn't sleep the rest of the night. In the morning, he went with his daughter to Kings County Hospital, and he took her to that doctor. And after a while, the doctor said to Moshe Mendel Feiner, do you mind leaving the room for a little bit? And he left the room. And a short while later, the doctor came out with the daughter, and he said, your daughter can see. She's fine now. And there were no explanations, no nothing. And from then on, the daughter was fine. The daughter, whatever. So the daughter lived a long life. And she probably is still alive. But so anyway, that's not the end of the story. Years pass. That's what I just told you was 1957, right? This is not so many years past. 2 years later, 1959, Moshe Mendel Feiner is working, and at the end of the day's work, he's on his way home. He's in Midtown Manhattan, and all of a sudden, he has absolutely no energy, and he collapses on the ground. And people start milling around him. What do we do with this guy? He can't even speak. He has no energy whatsoever. He can't explain anything. He never felt so weak in his life. People are walking past. A lot of people are stopping. They're arguing. What should we do? Should we try and move him, or should we call an ambulance? What do we do? And nobody had cell phones back then. That was about 4 decades before cell phones became common. And then after several minutes, suddenly he feels a surge of energy. He picks himself up, and ever applause. And he goes home. He gets home after about an hour from his commute, and his wife is in the driveway, and his wife is hysterical. She's crying hysterically. And he said, why are you crying? And she said, I'm so worried about you. He said, how did you know anything happened? Because how could she know? No cell phones. And nobody knew who he was when he collapsed, and he didn't call. And she said, I was so worried about you. An hour ago, I got a call from the Lubavitcher Rebbe's office. Lubavitcher Rebbe wanted to find out, what is your mother's name? He wanted to daven for you. So that is one story from so many about how the Rebbe is tied. It says that, Mashiach, a Jew has a piece of Mashiach's neshama in him, and Mashiach has a piece of the Jew's neshama in him. We are intimately tied to the Mashiach of the generation, and the Mashiach of the generation, knows what he's doing, and he told us that it's our job. He's helping behind the scenes, but it is our job to publicize that Mashiach has already been appointed, and to publicize that we are in the beginning stages of the final redemption, and to do everything. A person should do everything they can to increase in Torah and mitzvahs, and to increase awareness of Mashiach in the world. So I want to end the story there, and thank you very much for listening. And sorry, you have a question? I'm going to unmute you. First, I'm going to turn off the recording, and